Hey everyone, welcome to another Australian behavioral meetup. We have a super exciting topic and a super exciting speaker for you today. But before I introduce Scott, please let me first get through some housekeeping. First, I am very happy to share that this talk series is sponsored, and I do have to read this from a different laptop screen, so I do beg your pardon as I look away from you for a second. So we are sponsored by the Plus UTS Business Futures, who is the enterprise learning arm of the UTS Business School. And they are strong supporters of our behavioral meetup, so thank you to them. They have delivered a range of customized and co-designed programs for leading organizations in highly collaborative ways, including the CBA, RBA, ASIC, and NSW Health, John Holland, Lion Co, and other very reputable institutions. Plus, UTS Business Futures is a very experienced and very able to assist your organizations achieve their goals through tailored, informative, and inspirational capability building programs that upskill your staff in ways that are relevant to your organization. If you'd like to inquire further, please email Plus UTS on business.futures@uts.edu.au. So they are the sponsors of today's talk, well, in general, of all of the talks that we have the pleasure of hosting. Now, another thing I'd like you to know, our presenter, so Professor Scott Rick, today is happy to take questions throughout. Now, if you think that is a bit messy because you don't really want to interrupt him in the middle of a sentence, as these online meetings always have a bit of a lag, that's completely understandable. Just put it into the chat and I will make sure, or Aaron, who will lead the Q&A today, will make sure that your question gets asked. You can put in brackets behind if you want it to be asked immediately or if you're happy to wait. So just give us a heads up. And now to actually tell you about who Scott is. So I've had the pleasure of knowing Scott for a couple of years now. Scott is an associate professor of marketing at the University of Michigan Ross School of Business. If you're thinking, oh, he's an American and it's our lunchtime, what on earth is the time in the States? It's currently 10 p.m. So I really appreciate him being a bit of a night owl. Scott received his PhD in behavioral decision research from Carnegie Mellon in 2007. For those of you who can't place what that university is, Carnegie Mellon houses one of the best behavioral scientists in the world, namely George Loewenstein. So very, very impressive university. And he then spent 2 years as a postdoctoral fellow at Wharton. If you're looking for who's at Wharton, that would be Katie Milkman, if I'm correct. So he's working with lots of amazing people there. His research focuses on understanding the emotional causes and consequences of consumer financial decision-making, which is what we'll be talking about today, with a particular interest in the behavior of tightwads and spendthrifts. The overarching goal of his work is to understand when and why consumers behave differently than they should behave, and to develop marketing and policy interventions to improve consumers' decision-making and well-being. And today specifically, he's going to talk about how different individuals, whether it's tightwads, spendthrifts, or what have you, navigate the money minefield in real relationships, which happens to be the title of his forthcoming book as well. So, with quite that introduction, Scott, please take it away. I am very, very keen to hear what your insights are, what your research has produced, and what to expect also from the book that would come out in January. So please do give us a preview.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Really glad to be here. Thanks everyone for joining. I want to talk about how couples can be happier with how they manage their money and go about making spending and saving decisions. It's kind of a tricky thing, I think. And so I want to begin by highlighting what I think is a fundamental ambiguity in romantic relationships. It's this question: should all money possessed by romantic partners be considered our money? Now, there are legal answers to that question. That's not my primary concern. I'm concerned about the psychology of it. So every dollar that's kind of possessed, whether it's like from a garage sale you ran as a kid and you sold some lemonade and now is half of that mine, should it be considered our money, to kind of new incoming money? So to help us think about this, I want to share an illustration, a fictional illustration from Curb Your Enthusiasm. I think it captures something very real, even though it's fictional. If you're a fan, you might remember this from one of the early seasons. But the basic setup is it's a couple's date. Larry and Cheryl are having dinner with Stu and Susan. When the bill arrives, Stu decides to kind of treat the entire table. He puts his credit card down, and Larry and Cheryl immediately say, "Oh my gosh, thank you, Stu. That's so kind of you." And then Susan's sitting there, Stu's wife, and she was like, "Aren't you going to thank me?" And Cheryl's like, "Oh my gosh, of course. Thank you, Susan. Thank you so much." But Larry is kind of confused. He said, "Well, Stu put the credit card down. I thanked him. Shouldn't that be the end of it?" And so Susan kind of clarifies, "Well, he's using our money to pay for it. So you can thank us. We're taking you out to dinner." But Larry's, again, kind of confused. He says, "Well, you can call it our money, but just for the sake of discussion, he's the one who goes out to work and earns the money. You don't work." And she says, "Well, it's not about where it's coming from." And Larry says, "No, it's completely about where it's coming from. That's what it's about. Where does it come from?" And so, most people don't have discussions this explicit about who can lay claim to the money in a relationship. But, I think a lot of us have questions in this area that come up from time to time. So it's understandable, but I want to say that Larry's perspective, as much as I'm kind of a fan of his in the show, this kind of scorekeeping orientation is really bad for serious romantic relationships. And it's really common, and it becomes more common as the relationship continues over time. So there's been a lot of psychologists that have worked on this kind of topic. Margaret Clark is probably the most prominent. But we can think about this distinction, which you're probably familiar with, of is it a communal relationship or is it an exchange relationships? And it turns out that a lot of romantic encounters begin in a communal way. But eventually, over time, they become more exchange oriented. So a communal relationship is needs based, meaning I help you because you need help, not because I'm looking for some immediate reciprocity. So you go out of your way to avoid scorekeeping. In a communal relationship, you might say to your romantic partner, "Can you do the dishes tonight? I'm so exhausted." So you're asking for this help because you need it. Over time, you can get into more of an exchange scorekeeping relationship. That's, in a business, you have exchange relationships. You nominate me for an award this year. Well, I probably have to nominate you for that award next year. It's kind of clear reciprocity. And so in an exchange relationship, you might say, "Oh, can you do the dishes last night? Because I did them last night." And it's kind of your turn. That is not a very healthy orientation for serious relationships. But many of us kind of fall into that over time. And relatedly, relationship satisfaction also declines over time. There are exceptions, of course, but for many romantic couples, for married couples, the happiest day of the relationship is the wedding day. And then there's this kind of gradual decline over time. You'll see two lines here. This is from a fairly well-known paper by Van Lanningham and friends. One is just kind of no controls in the model. The other has controls, but they're both kind of telling the same story. So you get this decline in kind of communal behavior, a decline in satisfaction. There is some hope here. Couples who can somehow keep up their adherence to communal norms manage to avoid some of this decline. They can kind of keep it more or less where it was on the wedding day, if they can somehow maintain this needs-based sharing of energy and resources. So that's a great place to be if you can get there, if you can stay there. And so, something that I and my colleagues have been thinking about for some time is that using a joint bank account, a shared bank account, might help couples remain communal. It might help to prevent this slide into scorekeeping. And the idea is that if you take at least incoming money, you have incoming your money, incoming my money, and funnel it through a joint account so that it becomes a shared pool of our money. And so again, you want to get away from the scorekeeping and the joint accounts. The funneling process could help that. And there are other nice things about a joint account. Carol Bourguignon, in 1990, she's done a lot of work on couples and money, and she proposes that a joint account can help to create a facade of equality. And facade is not a bad word always. Some facades are good. And when there's an income discrepancy in the couple, which there often is, even if both partners work, there's going to be some meaningful discrepancy. Even if they both work in the same field, they could be at different ranks. There's going to be discrepancy. And so it's good often to kind of take attention away from those differences in income by funneling everything, making it our money. Emily Garbinsky and Joe Gladstone have a very nice paper showing that joint accounts help to deter extravagant spending. The idea is that there's some monitoring that comes with joint accounts. And if you feel like you're being watched, you might behave yourself a little bit more. You might not spend in such a carefree manner. Later, I'm going to argue that sometimes it's okay to be carefree, but this is one reasoning for why joint accounts are good. And it might prompt conversations that help partners align their financial goals, get on the same page. Because once you're merging accounts and money, you start discovering things and you start learning about what your partner values and what debts they might have. And it can help kind of get you on the same page. Doesn't mean you both start saving vigorously. You might start saying, oh, we do need to take more vacations or take advantage of these other opportunities for fun. But you get on the same page. And there's correlational data suggesting that couples who use joint accounts are happier and the relationships last longer. Joe Gladstone, Emily Garbinsky, Cassie McGillner, they have this very nice recent paper they have longitudinal data, and they look at how couples kind of hold up over time. And couples with all pooled money, basically joint accounts, those couples are more likely to survive over time than are couples with all separate accounts, all separate money. So that's a really interesting hint that joint accounts could be doing something good. Now, of course, a question you might be asking, well, could it just be that happier couples are the most likely to choose joint accounts? Is it just selection? Is it possible the joint accounts are not doing anything? It's just the stronger couples choose joint. And yes, I do think there's some meaningful selection going on. There's this nice article in The Guardian a few years ago where they talked to some couples about how they handle their money. And I think this quote from Elizabeth and Graham is worth considering for a moment. And so Elizabeth reports this. She says, since we moved in together, all our money has been each other's. We have a joint account. Everything is jointly owned. I think it's a Christian thought that what you have, you share, and that you're a part of one family. I am guided by the teachings of Jesus in terms of having a one world perspective. At different times in our lives, my husband has worked and I've not. And I've worked and he hasn't. We see ourselves as one. So Elizabeth and Graham have a joint account, clearly view all money as our money, but it's not causal. It's kind of their kind of religious and spiritual orientation driving both the joint accounts and viewing it as our money. It's just a selection story there for them. But we think, on top of that, the actual joint account, adopting it, using it, could have some causal effects for the reasons I mentioned a moment ago. So that's what we wanted to examine. So this was, I want to tell you about an experiment that I ran with Jenny Olson, Deb Small, and Eli Finkel. We conducted a 2-year experiment that actually manipulated couples' account structure. And we followed them over those 2 years to see, are they happy? Are they talking? Do they still like each other? Are they arguing over money? So as you can imagine, and as you'll see in a moment, this is, I'm just giving you kind of a taste here. It's a pretty complicated paper. If you go to tinyurl.com/comsense, you can read the paper and the 78-page appendix and get into the details, but I'm going to give you an overview here. So, it's kind of a strange experiment to run. It was approved by our IRB here. That took some time, but we had to think about what kind of couples would be eligible. So we focused on male-female couples living in the US, both entering their first marriage. We wanted new couples, or at least couples that haven't been married for a while, engaged or married less than a year, newlyweds. Because there's this idea in psychology that the first 2 years of a marriage, that's kind of the connubial crucible. It's those critical 2 years that kind of set the couple on a path that remains pretty stable after that. So we thought if we could intercept couples during the connubial crucible, we could kind of really kind of affect the path of the couple. We wanted them currently using only separate accounts. We could have done it a different way. We could have taken people with joint accounts and made them change that, but that would be really messy and complicated and really hard to pull off. So we focused on people with only separate accounts, and we made some of them change. I'll tell you about that in a second. And they had to express some openness to changing the account structure in some initial screening survey. They didn't know that was a requirement for participating, but the question was in there. We asked, you have this account structure now, whatever it is, are you dead set on keeping this, or are you open to change? And we only took the people who were open to change. So we had to gather couples. We did it through social media posts. We did it through Craigslist. We got a bridal marketing mailing list through a jeweler, and we mailed them kind of snail mail letters. We did blog posts on wedding blogs. Jenny infiltrated some bridal shows and kind of caught brides-to-be and tried to persuade them to participate. So it's not your standard lab study. We really had to kind of piece this sample together. So we had 6,700 people complete this initial screener where we asked, is this your first marriage? How long have you been together? Are you open to changing? Most people were ineligible, and they just got excused from the study. There were 962 people who said, I would be interested, my partner would be interested, and they fulfilled all the criteria I just mentioned. We asked them to complete a consent form, which says, you might be asked to change your account structure. You might be asked to open a joint account. You might not be. We had to put that in the consent form. They also filled out a very extensive baseline survey that covered their relationship quality right now, their financial arguments at the moment, and other things. Most people who saw that said, this is too much, I can't do it. And they chose not to proceed. But we did get 230 couples, both partners, to complete the consent form and a baseline survey and say, I want to do this. So we got those 230 people. We know their baseline characteristics. And then we randomized them into one of 3 treatments. In the joint condition, we say, for the duration of this study, 2 years, we ask that you open and then use only joint savings and or joint checking accounts. And then within 3 months, you send in a bank statement. You can black out your account number, any sensitive information, but we want to see that you went to the bank and did this, opened this account. In a separate condition, we said we ask that you keep using only separate savings and or separate checking accounts. Whatever separation you have at baseline, keep it. And then in a third condition, we call it a no intervention condition. We just say, we ask that you manage your finances as you see fit. Whatever you want to do, just keep us posted. And then we followed them for 2 years. And there were 6 waves. Month zeros is what we call baseline. We checked in at 6 time points. And if both couples did everything, they got $250. Not a huge amount, given what all we were asking of them. But a lot of them just believed like this is kind of interesting and important research, and we want to participate. Importantly, we told them, if you can't comply with our instructions, that's fine. Just tell us that. As long as you keep filling out surveys, we'll pay you. We didn't want people to lie to us and say, oh yeah, I opened a joint account. Yeah. If you can't do it, just tell us. We'll still pay you. The key dependent measures, and we had to pre-register how we were going to form these measures, because they're both kind of indices of many, many items. So we pre-registered, these are our key measures. One is relationship quality, 46 items across 3 scales. Questions, items like, my relationship with my partner makes me happy. And then when it comes to financial harmony, this is 15 items, such as, when it comes to our finances, my spouse and I see eye to eye. So again, they're filling out these things 6 times over the course of 2 years. Each do it independently without talking to their partner. That's what we're trying to get, at least. And what I'll show you today, I'm going to focus on the couples who strictly complied with the experiment instructions based on a pre-registered compliance criteria. We have about 3 pages in our pre-registration about what it means to comply with our instructions. So a lot of people didn't comply. At baseline, they didn't look different on the key measures of relationship quality, financial harmony, or many, many other things that we measured. We didn't measure everything. They might differ in ways we didn't observe, but they did not differ on the key dependent measures or just about anything else we could think of. Wanted to note that. All right, so let's look at the key results here. This is a standardized measure of relationship quality. Right now, I'm showing you the path. We did some growth curve modeling. This is the no intervention results. This is the common pattern that I showed you earlier, where you are happiest at the beginning, and there's a steady decline over time. So no surprises here. No intervention. They were just left to their own devices. People who we told to stay separate, we see a similar decline over time. Not as steep as no intervention, but similar decline. The key finding is this. The joint couples did not experience this decline. You'll see the line looks like it's going up. It's not a significant slope. But the key thing is that they're not declining. They were able to kind of maintain the relationship quality at the beginning of the study. Why is that? We think there are many reasons. One is financial harmony. So again, financial harmony, are they arguing about money? Do they see eye to eye? In the no intervention in separate conditions, it's flat. There's not any obvious change over time. But in the joint condition, they do seem to be getting on the same page. They are starting to see things eye to eye. And so a lot of maintaining relationship quality was explained by this increase in financial harmony. There is a kind of very complicated mediation in the paper that you are free to kind of explore. But a lot of what we saw in the previous slide seemed to be explained by this increasing financial harmony among the joint couples. So you might be wondering, well, what happened in the no intervention condition where we did not tell them what to do? They could just do whatever they wanted. So 44% maintained separate accounts throughout. 28% did a partial merging, some kind of joint accounts with either one or two separate accounts also. And then 28% eventually, on their own, completely transitioned to a joint account at some point. Usually that point was in year 2 of the study. They waited a long time to get to it. Unlike our joint couples who were told, do it now. Let's see what happened to them. A lot to look at here. The red line, these are the couples who switched to a joint account at some point. The blue line are people who remain separate. For this, I'm just looking at pure joint or pure separate. I'm leaving out the mix so we can kind of compare them to the previous graphs. So what we see, there is some selection. It's marginal, but it's consistent with past correlational research. Couples that were happier at baseline are more likely to eventually select joint accounts. But we see these similar declines over time. And so you might very justifiably be wondering, why does joint look different here than it did when it was assigned? We think there are at least 2 key differences. One, it took much longer for these couples to get to that joint account. The joint assigned was prompted right away, but these couples took their time, thought about it, they waited. And it's also probably a tougher decision when you have to bring it up and explore it with your partner who might not feel like talking about it. There might be some tension there, as opposed to us coming in and telling them, do this thing. You're open to it, now just do it. So we think that that may be at play here. The sample, we can't forget who's in this sample. The sample consisted of couples who were open to the idea of switching to a joint account. If you weren't open to it, you didn't get to be in the study, you're out. And so not all couples are open to the idea of merging their money, of course. Consider this report from Sarah, age 44. She says, my boyfriend wants it to be that his money is his and my money is mine, even though we have a 5-year-old boy and we've been together 7 years. He earns 4 times as much as I do, but he's very much like, why should I pay for more? Because I work hard for my money. He feels that his money should be his to do with as he likes. They're not going to open a joint account. If they did, it probably wouldn't help. And I would not recommend that for Sarah. I would say, I'm worried. Keep it separate. Protect yourself. So what our work suggests is that if you're on the fence about this, if you're open to it, well, among that group, maybe just go ahead and do it. But again, not everyone's open to it. And here's where we're going to take a bit of a churn. There are reasons to believe that many couples can do better than one joint account. Our study suggested that pure joint was better than pure separate, and I totally believe that. But we could only test so many account structures. We didn't have an infinite pool of couples to play around with different things. So I think there's good reason to believe that a joint account attached to 2 separate accounts could offer many benefits if done the right way. What do I mean by the right way? Well, I mean that all incoming money is funneled through the joint account. You want to psychologically launder the incoming money so that it all becomes our money. And then we have separate accounts attached to that joint account. We each get to spend some of our money without close monitoring. So it's still our money, but there's a little space for individuality, which is really important. Catherine Babb Mugera, she's a writer, and I think she has the right perspective on this. She wrote an article about this, and I just really loved this quote. It's long, but I want to share it. So she says, her and her husband both work, and we both earn decent salaries, which get direct deposited into our shared checking account. We've granted each other $500 a month to spend however we want, no questions asked. And this is how we're still married. The reason we had to institute an allowance system was because I cannot be questioned about buying Jaws t-shirts or sneakers or the occasional out-of-print biography going for $55 used on Amazon. I have to feel that I am independent or I cannot be married, as much as I love Chris. She doesn't want someone looking over her shoulder and questioning or even just closely observing what she's spending the money on. I think that's a good way to go. I think it's good to avoid transaction by transaction scrutiny. Otherwise, you get lots of bickering over small, inconsequential purchases. At least in the US, many people have been convinced by financial experts like David Bach, who have this, has a book called The Latte Factor, and he's basically arguing that you can be rich with any amount of money as long as you control your purchases of indulgent treats, your latte or whatever your version of the latte is. As long as you can hold back on that, you can become rich. You just invest the money and hopefully you never get sick, and hopefully the stock market has like amazing returns forever and there are no taxes or inflation. That's the thinking. The math just doesn't work, but a lot of people think it does. And so they're watching each other. Why do you spend that? We have coffee at home. You don't have to buy it at work. Well, buying it at work helps me get through the day, and some people need it. So it's good to avoid this kind of nitpicking and bickering. And also, if we have different hobbies or interests, I won't have the expertise or context to properly interpret your spending. Let's say a hobby of mine is like, oh, I like baseball cards. And so I know the market well. And maybe I buy a Tony Gwynn perfect condition rookie card for $1,000, which would be an amazing investment. I could get much more than that. But your spouse might look at that and say, how could you possibly spend $1,000 on a piece of cardboard? That's like so incredibly stupid. And they might have their own hobby where the prices to you seem ridiculous, but it brings them a lot of well-being. And that well-being is really compromised if they have a partner looking over their shoulder, second guessing what they're up to with the money. So what I want to propose is I think full, complete, proactive financial transparency is a little overrated. I am a big fan of financial translucency. For example, my wife and I, we each see what the other person takes out of the joint account. I know in general how much we're each spending per month, but I don't need to get into the weeds of, oh my gosh, you spent $150 on that? Like I could get that much cheaper. Like, do you really need? We don't need that. I don't think that's helpful for relationships. So that's why I say translucency. I need a sense of what we're doing, but I don't need the line by line details. So that's all I have prepared in terms of slides. As Merle kind of nicely mentioned, I do have this book coming out, Tightwads and Spendthrifts, Navigating the Money Minefield in Real Relationships. It's available via Booktopia. I think in the US it comes out in January. I've been told it comes out at the same time in Australia. So if you're interested, it's there. But I'm sure you have questions, curiosities. So I'd love to hear whatever you have on your mind. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Scott. I really, really enjoyed that. I might be your first Australian customer because I will usually pre-order the book now. I love this topic. I find it absolutely fascinating. Thankfully we are also I feel like I'm taking this over from Aaron, who said he would do the Q&A, but you have a question immediately from Colin, which I will read out to you and then I will leave it to Aaron. But Colin would like to know, to what extent was income disparity between the couples measured more broadly for its potential role, even within the couples that were open to change? So either as a baseline or has it changed during the experiment? I can probably put some context to this question. A lot of couples, and I think you probably found this in your research as well, Scott, like they agree on contributing 50-50, despite the fact that they don't make particularly like balanced incomes. So could you highlight a bit more what you found on that specifically?
So the Garbinsky, Gladstone, McGillner paper that I mentioned, they found that income level moderated the effect of account structure. We did not find that the couple's income or the discrepancy between partners' income moderated this difference. I think it could. And I think joint accounts could be my speculation would be they are most helpful when there are smaller differences in income that you can just kind of erase and paper over. Like if I work and you don't, it's going to be hard to forget where most of the incoming money is coming from. But if there are small differences that we can hide, I think that is where joint accounts could really help in that sense. And sorry, remind me that there were other items in the question. I'm so sorry.
No, that's completely fine. So in general, so
Yeah.
let's assume for a second that most couples they agree to contribute 50-50 to whatever. So let's assume they've got their own accounts, they've got the one joint account, very common setup, as you mentioned. But for one of them, contributing 50% to the household expenses is just a significantly larger proportion of the paycheck. Do you then see any issues arise?
So I don't like the contribute model. I don't like it where it comes into separate and then we chip into joint. I think it all needs to funnel through joints. And then we can take some into separate as needed. Household expenses are paid via joints. But, you know, the contributing 50%, that just seems like such scorekeeping, and it just makes these differences in what we earn so salient, and it doesn't feel like we're starting from a basis of, oh, it's all our money. But, you know, maybe it makes sense if it's a younger couple and things are not, it's not obvious that we're in this forever. But yeah, I don't love the where it starts in separate and then we contribute.
Scott, Lisa's got a question which I was actually going to ask as well. So she says, this was fascinating. Thanks, Scott. I can't help but wonder how this might change over the life cycle of a couple as partners potentially make trade-offs with having children and maybe not contributing as much financially, time away from the workforce when each partner chooses to retire.
Yeah. So I think that's going to be disruptive anyway. I think it's extra disruptive if we are starting from a scorekeeping orientation of, you know, well, I pay for this percentage and I chip in this amount. But if you're starting from a common pool, I think that can help kind of, you know, navigate these choppy waters. But you know, I will say that, you know, having kids around, it really does kind of, there are differences that you and I can live with when we're just us. But if we differ in our spending orientation, that can really kind of rear its ugly head when there are children watching, and I don't mind if you do silly things, but I do mind if you do silly things in front of the child and they're picking that up. So yeah, I have a chapter on that in the book, and we often, we tell our kids how to behave, and then we show them how we behave, and usually they copy what they see and not what they hear. But yeah, I think I'd still go with joint for kind of stability in these kind of life transitions.
I believe Sonia's question's been answered, so I'm going to go to Lisa. Apologies if I mispronounce it. Did you account for addictions? You may not know, but gambling addictions is quite common in Australia.
Yes. Yeah. So, yeah, there's a big difference between like a hobby and addiction. I don't think account structure can solve those kinds of addictions. I mean, yeah, if you suspect something's up, you might kind of tactfully say, you know what if we merge our money and just use a common account? Like, I need the self-control. Just put it on you, and rather than saying like, you obviously have a problem. But so yeah, maybe with detectability, you don't want all this privacy, but those problems are fundamentally non-financial. Money's involved, but the roots of those kind of addictions is not something that can be fixed with account structures or anything like that. That takes kind of therapy and actual care, psychological medical care. And so yeah, if there's reason to believe that there's destructive spending happening, then yes, it makes sense to kind of rein everyone in and try to have everything out in the open, I would say.
Great. What if one person has been scarred by a bad divorce and subsequent perceived unfair financial settlement in the past?
Yes. Well, the research certainly suggests that remarriages, separate accounts are like totally the norm. And I understand that. And a lot of what I've proposed here today is risky. If you were just looking to kind of protect, your finances and what might happen if the relationship dissolves, you would not do the things I'm recommending here. And, Eli Finkel and others have said, it's often a choice you make in relationships. Do you want to connect or protect? Do you want to, the things we do to protect our own interests can eat away at the relationship. So I understand why they do it. And maybe that helps them. But I'm just saying in general, the things we do to kind of be risk averse and prevent worst case things, that can hurt the relationship.
I've got another protect question, so I feel that the answer might be quite similar, and I guess it comes from if there is protection behaviors happening, that both parties in the relationship are aware and happy with that. But Diana asks, what if one person is a small business owner, so it's important to keep business payments separate from what's really joint funds with the
my wife and I are about to cross this bridge. She's starting her own thing. I think that's a good case where I want a 50,000-foot view of what they might be doing with their small business. But certainly I don't need to go on the roller coaster ride of seeing all the transactions and everything. But it's good if we talk about, oh, we need to take this chunk from our shared resources and invest it in the business. Like, yeah, good. But I'm certainly free to listen if she wants to share something, but I don't need to be kind of watching over. Yeah.
But that comes back to communication and a mutual understanding, right? Because I guess there could be a juncture that you both come to where it's, hey,
Yeah.
the small business needs another float, right?
Yes.
And then
yeah, so I'm all about communication at a certain level, at a higher level. So yeah, we need X amount, but what you do with that X, how you divide it, how quickly you use it. If you want to tell me, great, but I don't need to proactively probe that.
Andrew says, what is the relationship success of couples who don't have joint account? Is it a predictor of issues later? Should couples also have the money conversation at the beginning to know where they are both at? Sometimes one partner is hiding a lot of debt.
Yeah. Sometimes they're also hiding salary just to not make the other person feel bad. But no, I think an early high level set of conversations is great and essential. And I think that's part of why joint helped here. They kind of got on the same page and learned about each other. I have another paper with Jenny Olson where we find that it's so hard for even couples, even though they spend so much time together, to just learn about what the other person knows about money. I don't have a good sense of my partner's financial literacy, even though we talk about it a lot. But yeah, I mean, the Gladstone et al. Stuff suggests that the separate account couples are worse over time, worse off. Our research supports that also. I'm sure there are sensible ways it can work. Certainly, if you're in a fragile relationship, I'd say keep it separate. My goodness. But yeah, it's connect or protect.
Martin's got a question comment on that. Sounds like the metric for joint accounts may be an indicator of willingness to invest in the relationship and trust that things will go well. He's curious to know if you would see correlation between commitment to investing in a relationship and relationship joy, success, longevity. Seems very Gottman and Horseman-like.
Yeah. No, it is a leap of faith to some extent. And we do find that kind of the Carol Rustbolt measures of how invested are you, how much do you think about your alternatives to the relationship if it goes south. These are good predictors of whether or not you open joint in the first place. So it's a signal. We think it has these other causal effects, but it is kind of, when you choose it freely, it's a signal. Just like choosing a prenuptial agreement is the opposite signal of, I'm kind of skeptical about how this is going to go, but it's, I think good relationships need leaps of faith. We don't want to constantly walk around blindfolded, but you need some leaps.
Was there anything during your research for this book that surprised you? Was there anything that really stood out?
Certainly the results with kids. We do some work with parents and kids having conversations, and the thing about tightwads and spendthrifts is they don't like being tightwads and spendthrifts. So if you see your kid emulating you might tell them, like, do it the other way. And we see that. We see tightwad parents telling their kids, you can loosen up a little, when their kid seems like overly rigid and tight with money. We see it with spendthrifts too, where if they see the kid kind of spending a bunch and they say, okay, buddy, kind of reel it in. but the surprising thing, maybe it shouldn't have been so surprising, was that the kids are much more likely to follow what they see the parent doing. And so it was a real kind of wake up call for me, who I'm a big spendthrift. And, you know, my kids coerce a lot of purchases from me. And, you know, it's made me more mindful of, like, at least performing some restraint in front of them. When they go to bed, I can order everything online, but just like not being so obvious about it. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Any more questions, folk? Merla, any other burning questions for you?
No, I think all of the questions that I could possibly have been asked. Thank you so much, Scott.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's one of those really interesting ones, Professor Scott, where the research makes a lot of sense and intuitively just resonates. So there's like a lot of great questions that come up, but you kind of reflect on it and go, yeah, that does make sense. That if you're willing to invest in the relationship and set up that joint account, then you are probably going to be happier. So it's really good.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, we also look at, I should mention one other thing in the book, gift giving. And I think there's a lot of like common sense suggestions about gift giving that are wrong and bad. And like, oh, your birthday's coming up. A lot of people say, oh, I should just ask you what you want. I think that's a really bad idea. Again, leap of faith. You got to kind of learn about them and think about what they would want. And you'll get some bad gifts, but you'll also hit some home runs. And I guess that's the theme of the book, I suppose.
Oh, we've got another question that's come through. Might be the last one. What is your advice to someone who is in a joint account and feels like they're controlled because they have to make decisions jointly, and the other person is not ready to make a particular financial decision?
Yeah. Well, if they're not ready to do something that requires both of you to kind of turn your key, that's a problem. And we do find that when there's disagreements, spendthrifts tend to win. Like a tightwad can only say no for so long. Eventually the spendthrift will find their moments. But yeah, if you only have a joint account and you don't have separates, I would say create some separation by using a credit card, and they see how much you spend on the credit card, but they don't need to know transaction by transaction what you did with it. Again, just kind of getting that top level view. Yeah, I will say that, yeah, just because it's a no today, it's frustrating, but yeah, usually the spendthrift, the person who's in favor of going for it, they will find their moments, and the other person will, for better or worse, will kind of say, okay, fine, let's do it. Yes.
Awesome, Scott. I don't know if you can see the chat, but there is a lot of love for your talk. So lots of people thanking you.
Thank you.
And again, massive thanks for staying up late to chat with us.
Yeah, of course.
Lots of people saying fantastic conversation. So everyone, don't forget, Scott's book is on screen, and you can get the pre-order from Booktopia. But Scott, thank you for a fantastic talk and sharing all your wisdom with us. Really fascinating.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun. Yeah.
Merla says Google him, and for everyone, we'll announce the next meetup shortly. But yeah, thank you again, Scott. Wish you a good night's sleep, mate.
Okay. Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.